on the east coast of Scotland.
Every now and then, things spectacularly erupt.
The excavation of an ancient burial ground
I want to go and have a look and see if we can work out what happened to him.
uncovers a mysterious skeleton
There's some kind of blade being thrust into his shoulder.
and an 800-year-old killing.
If you don't have much and you lose it all, there's a sense of desperation.
Murder is a crime as old as time.
We've got the skeleton here. What can the bones tell us?
In some cases,
We've got a crime scene at 10,000 feet.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
have been unsolved for centuries.
It's a mystery.
He had his knees sticking up like this.
You have here his head?
Now, archaeological geneticist Professor Turi King
It tells us something about our past.
and top homicide cop Rod Demery
I've seen hundreds of murders, and it's all about putting that puzzle together with the evidence.
are finally unearthing the truth
So this could be an axe? Sure.
buried in these ancient mysteries.
Whether it's now or 1,500 years ago, I still want to know what made this person do what they did.
Former homicide detective Rod Demery is in Scotland to investigate an 800-year-old murder case.
Scotland's kind of spooky. It's really still, and anything still and quiet has potential to hold secrets. I've seen just about every type of murder that there is, whether it's now or 1,500 years ago. I don't know that the motives or the reasons why people do it change at all. It takes the same cold heart, same steady hand.
Professor Turi King is already at the incident room.
This is a really fascinating period of Scottish history, so I'm really interested to see where the forensics can take us with this. But I think we're going to be missing a lot of the forensics that Rod might be used to. It's 800 years ago, so Rod is 800 years too late.
Their incident room is a 16th century castle just 3 miles from where the body was discovered.
This is someone who was found during the excavation that was taking place down by the harbor.
In 1999, archaeologists excavated an ancient burial ground near the sea in the town of North Berwick.
And they found this individual just here.
Of all the skeletons they exhumed, one, skeleton 605, seems suspicious.
There's actually not that much of him.
And to this day, his death remains a mystery.
So we've got a little bit of torso and arm. there.
Right. So it looks like the left side of it?
Yeah, just the left side of him. Scapula, spine, few ribs, arm, a little bit of the skull. That's about it. Not much to go on.
It seems gruesome, but it's not unusual for parts of skeletons to go missing as cemeteries are altered across the centuries. Scientists were able to carbon date the remaining bones. They show that the man was alive between 1150 and 1280 AD.
So what do you know about the Scottish medieval period?
Not a lot. Knights, shining armor, damsels, distress. That's about it.
We're just coming into that period, and it's quite a rough time.
Medieval Scotland was ruled by a king, Alexander III. But it was effectively a divided country, broken into often warring territories. North Berwick on Scotland's east coast was the center of a territory called Lothian. Ruins of classic Motte and Bailey castles like this one still survive from the era. But with nothing more than an 800-year-old partial skeleton to go on, this will be a tough case to crack.
It's just like, what am I going to do with this? Once it's at a skeletal stage, that's a roadblock for any detective. You need somebody who has expertise in that.
Do we have anything to work with?
Well, in a case like this, we can learn an awful lot from the skeleton by examining the bones and doing some forensic analysis. I want to go and have a look, see if we can work out what happened to him.
Okay.
I deal with ancient remains on a very, very regular basis. You're looking to see if there's anything that suggests how this individual died. Was it a violent death?
To discover what the remains might reveal, Turi is meeting Dave Henderson, the bone specialist who first examined the body.
So Dave, we've got the skeleton here. What can the bones tell us?
Well, the first thing to say is he's a large male. He's about 5'9", which is pretty tall for a medieval Scot.
At the time, the average height would have been around 5'6". Marks on the bones can also reveal his build.
You can see on his humerus here, the upper arm bone, these rough patches show how the muscles were used repeatedly. He's quite strong and robust.
They can also estimate his age.
There's not an awful lot of wear on those teeth. We can tell he's around about 20 to 25 years old.
So a young man then?
Young man, prime of life.
And most importantly, Dave has forensic evidence of how the man died.
When I first saw this, I was astonished. So there's some kind of blade being thrust into the shoulder.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Which went right through. So that's been a major blow from behind.
The sharp wound is on the left scapula, or shoulder bone. But Dave noticed the weapon didn't stop there. It continued right through into the fifth rib beneath it.
So that is from behind a sort of stab into the back.
And it's not the only one. There's a second stab wound to the same shoulder bone.
Again, very sharp. It seems to be a downward blow.
And two more, plunging into the back between the 7th and 8th. And 8th and 9th ribs. These were probably the fatal blows.
Crikey. So it looks like somebody really knew what they were doing.
Yeah. That would actually go straight into your heart at that angle.
So definitely murder.
Definitely murder, yeah.
With murder by stabbing confirmed as cause of death, Rod heads to the part of North Berwick where the remains were found.
In a modern-day murder, the witnesses that I speak to may be, a neighbor or a friend or something. Now my witnesses are archaeologists or forensic scientists. Someone that knows that community or that history, the lineage. They're just not immediate witnesses, but they're the closest that we got.
Archaeologist Tom Addyman led the dig that discovered the body.
So typically, when I investigate a murder, I like to know the area a little bit. So what was medieval North Berwick like?
I think it was a very prosperous place. It was a small coastal community, a small town, set in very rich farming land and benefiting from the very good harbour.
Okay, so a lot of import-export type of goods being traded and so forth.
Absolutely. It was also a major routeway, and the harbour was the launching point for travel across the Firth of Forth on the pilgrimage route to St Andrews.
The cathedral at St Andrews was the largest of its time in Scotland. and one of the most important holy sites in Europe. By making the holy journey, or pilgrimage, pilgrims believed they might cure illnesses, forgive their sins, or earn entry to heaven. St. Andrews drew travelers from as far away as southern England, France, and even Germany.
Wow, so a lot of pilgrims from all different types of places just kind of pass through here to get to St. Andrews.
Yes, more or less anybody coming from the south, particularly from England. There are 4 or 5 major routes through the hills and along the coast that converged here at North Berwick.
The ferry from North Berwick's harbor was helpful to their journey, shortening a long trek of 84 miles into a single day's sail across the Firth of Forth. At its peak, it was used by 10,000 pilgrims a year.
Any place that draws a bunch of tourists or a bunch of transient people can be problematic at times. Some people may come on a pilgrimage to go to see St. Andrews, and some people are just opportunists. You know, they can make money and kind of live off there. People like that. Not everyone's good.
Back with the skeleton, Turi is hoping Dave Henderson's expert eye might be able to spot a clue as to the victim's identity.
So looking at the remains, is there anything else you can tell from them?
Sure. For example, on the shoulder blade here, that little hook, this is called the acromion.
The acromion is the top of the shoulder. In most skeletons, it is a seamless extension of the scapula, the main shoulder bone. But sometimes, very rarely, it doesn't fuse or join properly to the scapula.
You can see sort of a line.
Yeah.
So what's causing that?
Repeated stress on that shoulder joint.
It's evidence of a strain caused by a repetitive motion.
So is this something like he's a sailor, or, you know, is he, I'm Canadian, I think lumberjack. Is he chopping wood?
Sure,
Is he,
yeah.
you know?
There are several movements of the shoulder could do that, but that sort of action.
It's an intriguing lead.
I'm really interested in this shoulder abnormality that he's got. I want to find out a little bit more about it, because it might tell us a little bit more about who he was and what his occupation was.
But for now, Rod is still working the pilgrim angle. He wants to retrace the route travelers would have taken to the ferry. Along the way, they'd have passed the town's giant hill known as the North Berwick Law, where Rod's meeting archaeologist Peter Yeoman.
So once they arrive here and they see this, it's got to be a great feeling.
Yes, North Berwick Law is a major landmark today, and it was in medieval times as well. And they knew by the time that they got here that they were really getting very close. And we can see the water from here, the Firth of Forth, the 10 miles or so of water that they had to cross. And once they were on that side, they were really very close to their goal at St. Andrews.
What I know about St. Andrew is that he's regarded as the first saint, sort of the one who spotted the Messiah.
First apostle, first follower of Christ. So he is the top rank of saints. And there was only 2 places where pilgrims could come into contact with that enormous power. One was Santiago de Compostela in northern Spain, the other was here.
So this journey, it's, for miracles and maybe even atonement.
Yes, exactly. And there are even records of this for St. Andrews.
The draw of salvation for pilgrims and redemption for sinners created a thriving market in North Berwick. Lodging was often free, but locals could sell clothing, food, and other items to thousands of visitors a year.
So being travelers, pilgrims, tourists, or strangers, they'd be easily identified, I would assume.
Yes, that's right. And it was important that they could be identified as pious pilgrims, because that could qualify you for being generally looked after and cared for. So they had a characteristic garb, long wool tunic, if you were well enough off, a good pair of boots, and often a small bag that you wore across your shoulder.
And there was one other particular way pilgrims could be recognized.
This badge was found at St Andrews, and this is one of the ways in which they would be identified.
My method is to look at a historical murder and compare it to a modern-day murder. If you have people that are traveling from one part of the world to another, that's like a tourist that's going to be in New York City and gets mugged on the subway. I think the definitions or the verbiage may change, but the circumstances don't.
If pilgrims are coming, they're almost like tourists. And whether they're wearing different type clothing, shoes, or whatever, robbery is a likely scenario.
Absolutely. And pilgrims on the road could be seen as easy pickings. So they could be prey to bandits. And they wouldn't necessarily be carrying anything of tremendous value. But people were very poor. And they might feel that taking something off a pilgrim wasn't so bad.
Peter's description has given Rod an idea for his first suspect.
The victim, it's possible, was a pilgrim. And the suspect would be a robber. You know, someone's not going to be here very long. No one really has any loyalties to him. They think he has something of value, they're going to take it. Now, that turns bad when that person resists. So it's very possible that someone just robbed him.
As Rod zeroes in on robbery as a motive, Turi is meeting with archaeological finds specialist Julie Franklin in the hope of discovering what weapon was used and how.
Each weapon will have its own fingerprint. And that's where I'm hoping that the scientific evidence will help us. So can we tell anything about the weapon by looking at the shape of the wounds on him?
The best of them is the one through the shoulder blade, where we have this very clear mark where the blade has gone right through the shoulder blade. And there's another tip up here where the tip of the blade has just cut into it.
And it looks like a diamond.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is lozenge-shaped.
So that's a pretty distinctive shape. What did you think did that?
We thought it was a knife.
So you don't think it's something like a sword or an arrow?
We considered swords, but swords are obviously big, long weapons, and trying to use a sword over arm like that, it just seemed unlikely. And the two through the ribs are so accurate, it just seemed unlikely.
So you've come down to a knife. What are the knives that people have at this period?
Well, this is the kind of knife that most people would have carried at the time. Everyone would have carried a knife like this. You can use it for cutting things, you use it for eating.
But a standard knife is only sharp on one edge and has a flat back to the blade, making a triangular wound.
So it couldn't have made those stab marks.
So what could?
Well, this is a medieval dagger. And as you can see, it has a lozenge-shaped section. And this fits perfectly with the shape of the incisions and the bone.
Who's carrying one of those?
This would be carried by someone who was a professional killer, a soldier of some kind, but this is for killing human beings with, that is its main reason for being.
With the blade profile, Turi and Julie can determine the likely angles of the knife attack by matching their replica weapon to the injuries.
So it would have had to have been right down.
Yeah, and it fits into that notch there.
Angled like...
And up, isn't it?
Flat,
It's up
like,
and flat.
like that.
Yeah.
The 2 stab wounds on the shoulder were delivered downwards, whilst the 2 fatal strikes, between the ribs, entered the body upwards, all of which seemed to point to a speedy, surprise attack.
Are there any self-defense injuries on him?
No, there's nothing. The only injuries that we could find on the bones that we have left, obviously, are the 4 stab wounds.
So if someone's coming up from behind and doing this quite professional killing, it sounds like he didn't really have much of a chance.
I don't think he did, no.
Piece by piece, these 800-year-old bones have begun to clear the mysteries surrounding the victim's fate.
We know quite a bit about what happened to him and the weapon that killed him. That's kind of a strange feeling to know about the last few minutes of somebody's life and how they were killed.
How does the forensic evidence of a surprise attack fit with Rod's theory of a robbery gone bad?
The really fascinating thing about this is from the shapes of the injuries, we can tell pretty clearly it was a dagger that was used to kill him.
Wow, yeah, that would absolutely do that.
So what's your thinking?
I think the first suspect would be a robber, someone who robbed a pilgrim. I think what kind of points me in that direction is just the location of the burial. Now, we know that this church was used for pilgrims, and I wouldn't be surprised if most people buried there were pilgrims. And I think just as it's a transient place for people to congregate and go on the pilgrimage, it's the same place for them to be laid to rest.
My concern with that theory is that this weapon is expensive, and that suggests to me, you know, it's carried by a professional. Would they need to rob somebody, do you think?
Well, they may have robbed someone that took that knife.
True.
So we can't really say that.
I'm really interested in that shoulder condition because it might give us an indication as to occupation. So I want to go and find out about that.
Okay, sounds good.
Unfused shoulders like the victims are rare. But famously, forensic examination of skeletons on the shipwrecked Mary Rose, an English warship sunk in 1545, have revealed that possibly at least 14% of the crew had the same condition, known as os acromiale. Records show that crew members were fighting with heavy bows and arrows. Could the victim have been an archer? Professor Hamish Simpson is an orthopedic surgeon.
So what is os acromiale? What is that?
This is the shoulder blade here. There's a couple of smaller areas, one at the very tip here and another one here. If you have mechanical forces on this area that are constantly kind of moving these bits around, it prevents them forming a solid piece of bone across here.
It's like they never properly fuse.
That's correct.
Yeah.
So in this one, this part of the bone here is all fully fused here, whereas in os acromiale, there would be a little line across at this part here, or a partial line across there, rather than it being solid bone.
A recent study has found that baseball pitchers are more likely to have the condition than any other player. And always on one side, on the shoulder of their dominant or throwing arm.
It was a far, far higher incidence in the dominant arm of pitchers who were throwing the ball more than 100 times per week.
Scientists have narrowed the cause down to shock, a sudden snap or explosion of energy in the pitch. Professional tennis players also develop the condition in their dominant shoulder.
So what about everyday manual work? So if he's chopping wood or, you know, if he's on the coast, is he rowing? Will that give you the same sort of thing?
I think it's less likely to. It's not just any kind of type of force. I think it's that sudden explosive force that it looks more likely to give you this condition.
The theory that archery could cause this condition has never been formally tested. Until today. Hamish's colleague, Professor Keir Nazarpour, is wiring up a volunteer's shoulder with state-of-the-art motion sensors.
Should we have a look then?
Okay.
Let's see what happens. Keir, you've got Jez wired up now. So what do we do next? What are we looking at here?
So we are looking at the acceleration on the X, Y, and Z axis right at the tip of the shoulder blade.
That's left side and that's right side?
That is correct. That is the left side, that is the right side, yes.
If the team can prove archery creates a stronger shock on the left or bow side, it'll be compelling evidence that it can cause os acromiale.
Should we see it?
I think, yeah. So, draw, please.
He's pulled back.
So you see a draw. And loose. We see a really big acceleration across the three axes, which is larger on the left-hand side.
When shooting an arrow, the shoulder that holds the bow receives a sudden, very strong force, seemingly enough to cause the unfused condition seen in the victim's shoulder.
Yeah.
But let's do a few more, just making sure that this was not just the one triad.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Draw. And loose.
Wow, consistent.
Very consistent.
Look at that.
Indeed.
I think that fits really nicely with the idea that this skeleton was from that of an archer.
That was truly fascinating. And what came out of that was that someone being an archer could really account for someone having osteochromiale. And Hamish seemed pretty convinced by that. So it's looking likely that our murder victim was an archer.
To better understand what sort of person a medieval archer would be, Rod's meeting historic archery expert Ian Stevenson.
That's impressive.
Do you want to have a go, like?
Yeah.
If you just step in slightly and I'll show you.
Okay. Now, I'm left-handed.
Oh, no. You ever heard the word sinister?
Yeah.
Well, sinister is Latin for left. So left-handed people are the devil's people. Do you still want to shoot left-handed?
Yeah. All right, so this has to...
Nope. Tip your bow over.
Okay.
Your arrow goes on top.
Okay.
The red one's up, yeah. Did you hear it click there?
I heard it click, yeah.
Shoulder towards the target.
Okay.
Point your fist towards the target.
Okay.
Pull the string right back to your ear. Right back to your ear. Right back to your ear. Loose. Okay. The only thing wrong with that was you didn't get your elevation right.
Yeah.
You know, you were aiming straight for the target.
Straight for the target.
But the further your target goes away, the higher you've got to elevate your bow before gravity takes over and just pulls it down.
We call that bullet drop with the gun.
Yes, exactly.
It wouldn't have been unusual for medieval archers to use bows with 100-pound draws. Loosed arrows could travel at more than 200 feet per second, over a distance of 120 yards.
I'm going to give you another bow here. Instead of a 35-pound bow, this is a 50-pound bow. There you go. Now do exactly the same.
Right. Let's see.
Push that. Oh,
yeah, that's a lot stronger.
Pull.
Yeah, that's a lot
pull again. Pull. Pull. Pull.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's about it.
And these people did this every day.
That's 50 pounds. Medieval archer could draw and loose between 12 and 15 arrows a minute.
Oh, God.
Yeah. Could you manage that right now?
Yeah.
No.
An archer would make a formidable opponent. Extremely strong and highly trained.
What type of men were they?
roughies, tufties.
Yeah.
When they went on the field, they were soldiers. But if they were fighting amongst themselves, they were street fighters, they were brawlers. They would knock 7 bells out of each other, and, you know, if it came to the crunch, you just draw the dagger.
The likelihood that the victim was a trained fighter raises new possibilities for his murder.
What we do know is that archers were very strong guys. I mean, they were really rough. They were tough battlers, you know. They went to war, they did personal protection, bodyguard. I want to know what's going on locally. You know, what would get somebody this tough killed?
Throughout the Middle Ages, all of Scotland was divided into fiefdoms, ruled over by great lords. Even today, East Lothian bears witness to this violent and tribal age. Ruined castles and other fortifications dot the landscape. For an archer living in the 12th or 13th century, there would be plenty of opportunity for work. To find out more, Rod heads to meet medieval historian Professor Richard Oram.
So I'm curious, who would an archer be working for?
Down here in East Lothian, the king has delegated power to great lords, and those lords have got lesser lords under them, and it's almost like protection rackets in a sense.
Right. The way you explain this, it's no different than ganglands or bosses of crime families. You know, there's always these sort of skirmishes and power struggles.
And it's just possible that you have got members of the opposing teams, probably the better way to put it, who just happen to turn up in the same place at the same time. It's not planned, but somebody sees our man and thinks, right, that's one of Bissett's men.
Present day, that would translate, this guy's in a West Coast street gang, and he sees a rival gang member, and they killed one of their gang members. It's the same crime.
The violence around North Berwick at the time has led Rod to his second suspect.
In my experience, being in the wrong place at the wrong time, wrong side of the tracks, wrong neighborhood, get you killed. When you start introducing the possibility of some sort of military-style weapon in the manner it was used, then that kind of changes the scenario.
With a second suspect and 2 possible victim profiles now in play, Rod needs help to progress the investigation.
If you're working a homicide, you need science to prove that you're not just chasing ghosts.
The team has arranged to meet weapons expert Jonathan Waller to try and recreate the killing.
So John, we think our guy was killed with a dagger. So can you tell me about this weapon?
Sure. This is what they call a quillen dagger because the crosspieces are known as the quillens. It can be held in a reversed, some people call an ice pick grip, stabbing this way. It can also be held in a sort of normal grip.
So that's kind of interesting because from the wounds on our man, it looks like there were 2 different grips. Here, turn around. So you've got one here, and it comes in like that. And then you've got another one here that it looks like it's coming down that way. It actually goes into the rib. Then we've got 2 that go through the ribs, and they're going up. What do you think? 2 different grips?
Well, if I was stabbing someone from behind, I'd be coming in on this side.
So for me, that's really interesting because the first wound comes in here.
For Jonathan, these injuries don't indicate a professional, thought-through attack.
If I was coming in to murder somebody, I'd be doing the simplest, most effective thing, which would make me expect the wounds to be on his right side. These stabs...
That at the top was weird.
To me, strikes as somebody that's, you know, why didn't I stab him in the throat?
Yeah.
Why didn't I stab him down behind the collarbone and go that way?
Yeah.
Instead of a coordinated attack, the injuries indicate a much more chaotic situation.
Is there another possibility?
I think there could be an altercation that has escalated. And knives getting drawn like they do these days. So, you know, you could have been stabbing me as much as I've been stabbing you.
Right,
But
and that would account for the extra stabs.
If he grabbed me, I could be pushing his arm out of the way before he draws his dagger, pulling my own. We could have also got into some kind of grapple. And I'm stabbing him from behind.
Yeah.
And that could have taken place with me on the floor and you on top. And I'm drawing the knife because I don't want to be stuck there. It could even be that you've grabbed me around the waist and he shot in to grab me and I've managed to pull my knife out. I'd be stabbing, just to get him off. So my feeling is it's one of those confrontational scenarios.
Jonathan's attack analysis suggests that the wounds are more likely consistent with a fight than a professional killing.
So what do you think?
So that's completely changed my opinion talking to Jonathan. So talking to the archaeologists, they thought it came from behind, almost like he was jumped. But having seen that, I'm starting to think it was a brawl.
I would agree. I think it's a fight. I don't think it's an assassination.
Somebody got into a fight.
Any defensive wounds may have been on the parts of the remains that were missing. With a new perspective on the attack, Rod wants to look at scenarios that might bring a pilgrim or an archer into a fight. And with 4 years' experience as a military policeman for the US Navy, he knows exactly where to look.
I think there's a mixture of alcohol and military and youth and testosterone that's definitely worth the look.
The ancestors of modern-day bars were alehouses. These were small home businesses run by women who brewed ale for their families and sold anything left over to paying customers, either through a window or by inviting them inside. Drinking ale was often a communal event, and drunkenness was common in medieval society. In an age where everyone carried a knife, the results could be deadly. Turi is meeting Professor Elizabeth Ewan, an expert in Scottish history.
There were lots of alehouses in North Berwick at the time. There's an awful lot of records of brawls that probably started in alehouses. You end up with assaults or people calling each other names or insulting them, and then that leads to blows. And that might have been what happened with our man.
Fights in alehouses were sometimes caused by another medieval obsession: gambling. Mark Hall is an expert in the games of the time.
How popular was gambling in the Middle Ages?
I think it's fair to say that it was endemic. People liked to gamble. And dice were probably one of the most sort of scandalous forms of gaming when it was used on their own, particularly a game called Hazard.
The present-day game, craps, is closely related to Hazard and is still played widely in casinos across the world. But for people 800 years ago who owned very little, the stakes could be high.
People were willing to bet everything on trying to win the game, and you keep rolling until you've either won the money or lost everything, basically.
Mark has found evidence of everyone from noblemen to peasants going broke in hazard games.
There's this fantastic illumination, and you can see here we've got two guys. They're both totally naked. They're both burning in the flames of hell, and the illustrator has captioned it, "Don't play hazard, it's more dangerous than a sword, and this is the fate that awaits you if you do." In the period that we're looking at, in the early 13th century, there's a poem called De Vetula, and in there, warning is repeated that if you start a game of hazard, first you'll be calling each other names, then you'll accuse one or the other of cheating, then you'll start boxing each other, then you'll start pulling each other's hair, and then before you know it, someone's pulled a knife and someone is dead.
The combination of a young victim, a thriving drinking culture, and extreme gambling leads Rod to his third suspect.
I'm wondering if this guy was a gambler. If you don't have much and you lose it all, there's a sense of desperation. I don't know how easy it would be for someone to walk away from everything they lost. And I've seen in my career, it's not uncommon when people lose in gambling, where they become violent. It's just a matter of losing too much or winning too much or being accused of cheating.
Such events could lead to a brawl, just as the attack analysis suggested. Now, with 3 victim profiles and 3 suspects, Rod and Turi head to the incident room.
So have you got a favorite suspect out of those?
I think the likelihood of a pilgrim being robbed is a real possibility for me. I'd like to know more about him, where he's from. And if he's local, that would probably change the scenario quite a bit. But if he's not from the area and he's transient, then I would probably be inclined to think he was a pilgrim.
Yeah, I agree. If we had information about where he was from and it shows that he's from elsewhere, I'd definitely be more willing to believe that he's a pilgrim.
Rod is finding that the victim could match more than one profile. With North Berwick such a significant gateway to St. Andrews, the archer could also be a pilgrim. And one of the first medieval texts to be written in English, Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, backs up his theory. Among the cast of 24 characters on a pilgrimage, one in particular stands out. The yeoman, a servant to a knight who also seems to be an archer. In order to test Rod's theory, Turi has arranged for 2 of the victims' bones to undergo special analysis.
So stable isotope analysis is looking at what's known as isotopes, so different versions of particular elements, so carbon, oxygen, nitrogen. And they're fantastic because they can tell you a little bit about where they've been geographically.
Today, the tests are complete.
Hi, Jane and Angela. Nice to see you.
Hi. Professor Jane Evans and Dr. Angela Lamb are at the UK's National Environment Isotope Facility and have the results.
So what did you find?
A community very, very close to where this individual was found, only about a kilometre or so down the coast, had really very similar oxygen isotope ratios. So this individual was probably from that part of the east coast of Scotland.
And there's one other interesting feature. Normally, populations in Britain would have strontium concentrations between about, let's say, 80 and 120 ppm. But this individual had a value of 268, and that typifies the use of kelp and seaweed as a fertiliser. This use of marine fertiliser is quite specifically Scottish, and we know there is evidence that this method of agriculture was used about a mile down the coast from where he's living.
So it's looking like he's local based on what you found.
Yes, very much so.
Interesting.
Very, very, very interesting.
With the victim being a North Berwick local, Rod's pilgrim theory no longer holds up. He needs time to process this new development.
The successful homicide investigator is very fluid in his thoughts. I think tunnel vision is the killer of a good homicide investigation. If you fixate your mind or your thought process on, yeah, this is this, and I built this case up, and it's all going this way, and it's all going that way, and something comes along and kind of derails that, and you're not able to adjust to that, you're gonna fail.
With all of the evidence now complete, can Rod make it all come together into a single compelling case?
I think our victim was a younger man in his 20s. I think he was probably a military man, sort of an archer or some sort of enforcer. I think the attacker was another military man or someone that shared a similar background as he did.
Every now and then, things spectacularly erupt.
Classic flashpoints for young men to get involved in these types of incidents are bars.
There's an awful lot of records of brawls that probably started in alehouses.
You know, that age where you're not quite mature enough to understand your actions, and your testosterone kind of overrides your brain, and alcohol accelerates it. So it's a powder keg, it's gonna happen.
And then before you know it, someone's pulled a knife.
They're out, they're drinking, gambling possibly. When you have this sort of machoism going on, the slightest thing can challenge that.
They were street fighters, they were brawlers.
They're arguing over something as simple as a woman's affection, or their shoes, or what neighborhood they live in.
It's one of those confrontational scenarios.
The two individuals were probably facing each other at an argument or something. A fight ensued, and someone produced a weapon, and we have a stabbing. The murder weapon is a dagger.
This is for killing human beings with. That is its main reason for being.
When you look at the stab wounds, it's a fluid action. There's a fight going on here, involving the dynamics of the body moving quite a bit, because there's an attempt, there's a movement of the body, and then there's a final blow.
Rod believes the murderer was a drunken brawler.
It still goes on. It's just what young men do.
For Turi, the investigation has given a rare insight into a little-known part of medieval history.
This is about an everyday person. We don't know very much about everyday people in this era because there's just not the records about them. And we were able to bring new evidence to the case. The stable isotope analysis shows that he's likely to have been a local boy.
The unnamed skeleton's life and times have been unearthed. And finally, perhaps, the archer's bones can rest easy.
If we can work out where historical murders are the same as modern day murders, we know what we need to look for. You know, people are going to kill each other for this reason. And if we can reach back thousands of years and see that's the same reason and actually show that, you know, through proof, I think that kind of benefits everybody all around.